there are a lot of great things that come with self-employment, being a 1099 worker. There's a lot of extra overhead that also comes with it. And so that's what we're trying to solve at Found. And seeing those problems firsthand at Caviar, I was very excited to join Found to help address some of those problems.
As your early days at Caviar, I imagine that you were hearing from couriers, and these problems were very well known, but maybe not top of the priority list or product roadmap.
I had always been very into restaurants, worked at a pizza place growing up in high school, making pizza, delivering pizza.
I feel like with food delivery, one of the things I'm always a little skeptical of is because there's, three-sided marketplace. It's like you got a lot of people to keep happy at the same time too.
Welcome to the Rideshare Guy podcast, where you will learn about the rideshare and mobility industry straight from Harry Campbell, who's got over 5 years experience covering the industry and has talked to thousands of drivers. There's no better place to stay up to date, entertained, and educated. So let's dive in.
All right, so Nick Adler is the Chief Operating Officer at Found, where he's helping build a modern financial platform for one of the largest, most underserved segments of the U.S. economy, the self-employed worker. His career spans the restaurant and retail spaces. Perhaps most familiar to this audience, Nick previously served as head of market operations for Caviar, where he led a team of 100 plus people and was responsible for Caviar's local market strategy, restaurant sales, restaurant account management, courier fleet growth, and overall quality. So it sounds like he did a lot at Caviar and a lot of synergies to the self-employed that we know and love today. So Nick, how are you doing today?
Great. Thanks so much for having me on. Definitely been following you for a long time. So excited to be on the podcast.
Yeah, definitely. And, Found is a company that I think has been around for a little while, but it's kind of new on my radar and I don't know a ton about it. So it's kind of cool. I feel like I'm going into this interview. I've done some research and some prep, but I almost tried not to do too much prep about the product and what you guys are doing because I kind of wanted to, be surprised and look at it with a fresh set of eyes when we chatted.
I love that. Yeah, I'm happy to shed some light on what we're up to.
For sure. Well, let's rewind it back to the Caviar days, because I'm guessing there are some parallels and synergies to your work in the gig economy there early on. I mean, Caviar was an early company. So what sort of got you started at Caviar, and kind of how did that transition into your role now at Found?
Yeah, so I joined Caviar right after Square had acquired them in 2015. So still relatively early on in Caviar's lifespan. I had always been very into restaurants, worked at a pizza place growing up in high school, making pizza, delivering pizza. And so I was just really excited about the trend. So jumped at the opportunity to join Caviar, saw a lot of amazing growth, was a fun time to be in food delivery and the gig economy more broadly. But
what was the landscape like back then in 2015?
Yeah, it felt a lot more up for grabs, I guess, than it does now. So like Uber Eats hadn't started, at least in their current iteration. They were doing some testing of very limited menu stuff. Postmates was very big. Grubhub was by far the biggest. And us and DoorDash were sort of the newer kids on the block.
Gotcha.
But it was still before DoorDash or Postmates had raised their mega rounds of hundreds of millions of dollars, and before Uber went full bore into Uber Eats. So it was a fun time. Everyone was still launching new cities. I feel like now we're in a place, every food delivery platform is more or less in every city, and that was still a time when, I think when I joined, Caviar was maybe in 4 metro areas, 5, and DoorDash maybe in like 10. So it was still quite early on. But it was great, and I love my time there. Both to be in a 3-sided marketplace like that, you just get to make a lot of people happy, right? You're making life easier for the folks that are ordering food. You're providing good income to the couriers, extra income to the restaurants, and so it was a fun time to be in a space that was growing so quickly like that.
Yeah, although I feel like with food delivery, one of the things I'm always a little skeptical of is because there's, three-sided marketplace. It's like you got a lot of people to keep happy at the same time too, right? It's like not just drivers and passengers. It's like drivers, customers, restaurants, and then you have the platform too. So kind of almost a 4-sided, really, right?
Yeah, and it was definitely no easy task. And I do think we didn't always keep everyone happy, right? It was a balancing game where we were always trying our best. And I think one of the things that drew me to Found was the fact that they're solving a problem that I heard about a lot from our couriers. And so uh, thinking about the courier population for Caviar, or the dashers for DoorDash, as really part of a bigger wave of self-employment. So I think the latest stat I've seen is 60 million people in the US earn self-employment income. And so it's not just platforms like Uber or Lyft, DoorDash that have driven this trend, but it's even things like you, right? It's way easier to start your own media company today than it used to be. And what I saw firsthand at Caviar was the tools for these people are just not what they deserve. And I think everything we see is a lot of people start these jobs for extra income, for more flexibility. But with that comes this huge amount of overhead of, I thought I was going to earn a little extra money delivering food or driving passengers. Now I have to become my own accountant. I no longer have taxes withheld from my paycheck. I have to do those calculations on my own. And so I think a lot of people don't realize when they first take this step that there are a lot of great things that come with self-employment, being a 1099 worker. There's a lot of extra overhead that also comes with it. And so that's what we're trying to solve at Found. And seeing those problems firsthand at Caviar, I was very excited to join Found to help address some of those problems.
Yeah, I think that's very cool. And I'm sure, especially, since your early days at Caviar, I imagine that, you were hearing from couriers and these problems are very well known, but maybe not top of the priority list or product roadmap. It's more like, hey, we need to grow, we need to gain market share, we need to make sure, drivers and riders are staying happy. And so I think that it's definitely been cool for me to see the evolution. A lot of times it's like, oh yeah, this has been an issue for a while, but now there's more companies or the platforms directly are looking to solve these issues. And ideally the idea is, right, that everything gets better over time, right, that some of these holes get plugged. And I think you put it in a way that I really like, is that I always tell people, a lot of people sign up, it's really easy to get signed up. That's one of the things people love about working in the gig economy, and then they start driving or delivering and realizing, oh crap, it's a little harder than it looks. And I'm kind of, whether you realize it or not, you're running a business. So it sounds like that is one of the mission areas of Found. So would love to know more about Found, and maybe you can give me the quick pitch on the company and also why you joined.
Yeah, sure. I think you mentioned the platforms, and I think the platforms have been getting better at solving this, but I think they're not in a position necessarily to solve it entirely by themselves, because folks aren't doing all their business on one platform. Right. And that's where an outside third party like Found can solve the problems more easily, because we can do it across all platforms. And so the way Found works, we're a technology platform that combines banking, bookkeeping, and taxes, built specifically for self-employed freelance workers, 1099 workers. And so what we do is serve as a checking account for these folks. So you would, let's say, deposit your Uber earnings, your Lyft earnings, and your DoorDash earnings into our bank account by putting our account and routing number into the payout section of the apps. Or if they have instant payout with push to debit, you could put your Found debit card into the app and get paid out into Found. Because we're seeing all the income, and because we have a debit card where you can pay for your gas, pay for any supplies you get for your car, for a hot bag you're buying, we see all the income and expenses associated with self-employment. That allows us to make accurate calculations for tax withholdings. So what we do is, based on the income and expenses we see for your business, we put aside the correct amount of tax withholdings. And a lot of self-employed folks don't realize that if you make a meaningful amount of self-employed income, you need to pay quarterly estimates, not just annual taxes. And so that adds this ongoing burden throughout the year. This, what we hear from folks, and I heard this even at Caviar, and this is part of the reason I joined Found, because they were solving a problem that I had heard directly
Yeah.
from our couriers at Caviar, this low level stress of at any given time, I have in the back of the mind, am I about to get hit with a tax bill that I don't have
Hmm.
money to pay? And with Found, if you use Found as your bank account, you can't avoid that by um, having the money automatically withheld in a separate account.
Yeah.
And so, go ahead.
Yeah. So when you talk to freelancers and, gig workers, like what is the most compelling aspect of the Found product? Because I mean, obviously some of what you're describing, everyone has to sign up with a bank account. So they've got a checking account. Maybe they opened a business account, probably not, I'm guessing, and just use a personal checking, or maybe they set up a secondary, personal checking account, and kind of sign up and get paid. Obviously, that's the most important part that the money shows up in your bank account and that you can kind of spend for it. But I'm curious, like, what do you tell people? Like, this is the most compelling part of a Found bank account, or here's why. Here's the number one reason why you should sign up. Like, what really matters to get these gig workers that you guys are working with?
Yeah, and I think it's peace of mind and time back, right?
Hmm.
So I think there's two pieces there. One is the stress of, am I doing this right? Do I have enough set aside for taxes?
Mm.
And the other is doing those calculations takes
Kind of
time.
paying
And
taxes. Yeah.
yeah, and so we take both those things off the plate, right? You need a bank account anyway. We highly
Hmm.
recommend that you have a separate business bank account. All of this gets so much harder if you're just getting your money deposited into your personal Chime account or your personal
Yeah.
Bank of America or your personal Chase account. Then disentangling everything is a lot of work
Yeah.
and you could easily get it wrong. So we make it very easy to set up a Found account, get started, and say, hey, have all your 1099 earnings go into this account.
Hmm.
And after that, everything is automated, right? Because we combine banking with bookkeeping and
Hmm.
taxes, because we're seeing the transactions, we can do that all in the background. So you
Yeah.
can focus on optimizing your earnings and don't have to worry about
Yeah.
tax withholding, bookkeeping, etc.
I guess for me personally, I've sort of always felt like tax withholding and bookkeeping, it's like one of those things like, oh, you kind of know you need to do it, but you also like don't want to do it, So it's almost like, hey, this bank account can help me with that. I'm like, I don't really want to do it in the first place. So it's like almost like scares me a little. Like I was going through the found.com website, and I think what jumped out to me is I like the no hidden fees, no minimum balances, easy sign up, no credit checks, unlimited transactions. It sort of seems like you guys are leaning into that, like, hey, every time something happens with Chase or one of the big banks, they charge you $15 and it's super annoying, right? Like you're kind of going for the opposite of that, right? It's like, oh, all those little nitpicky fees, or you have to keep a 1,500 minimum on average, but if you drop below one day, like all the kind of junk that people have to deal with, that doesn't seem to add a lot of value, just is like more of a nuisance than anything. Seems like you guys are doing building a product that kind of addresses that. And I know for me personally, that's kind of what stood out to me when I was perusing the website just now.
Yeah, and that's the goal, is to solve this problem, but do it in a
Hmm.
way that is free to the user, that is easy to sign up, um, and make it easy enough that it is worth having your own separate business bank account, because it's quick, it's easy, it's free, there's no
Yeah.
fees, and it solves this extra problem that, like you, I don't think anyone, maybe if you're a self-employed accountant, you get
Hmm.
into it to do accounting. I don't think anyone
Yeah.
else goes out on their own, or signs up for Uber or
Right.
Lyft or DoorDash, or Postmates to make extra money because they love bookkeeping and
Right.
taxes. And so we want to take that off the plate so you can focus on making more money and focus on the job itself.
Yeah. In my book, The Rideshare Guide for Drivers, we sort of lay out A to Z. Realistically, there's all these things you need to do, but realistically, like here's the order of importance. Get a phone mount, right? Get a dash cam. Most people don't do that, right? And we kind of just lay it out. And I feel like, kind of business checking is pretty far down the list, even though, it's like, again, though, there's like a million things you have to do. But realistically, you're not going to do, it's not like human nature for this job or really anyone, to do everything all at once. So So, I think we've talked about this. I think it might be interesting to define this definition because you guys are going after this segment of, I guess we've said freelancers, we've said self-employed. You said the 60 million stat. I think you said 60 million people now earn self-employment income. So I think of Uber drivers and Lyft drivers and delivery drivers as in like a very different segment than, I don't know, an Airbnb owner, even, right? Someone who owns a house or someone who is like building up a photography business. There are parallels and synergies, but I'm curious, how do you think about the different verticals underneath that 60 million self-employment?
Yeah, they are very different. And I think the thing that unites them all is that they all need to have a business checking account, someplace to keep their money. They
Yeah.
all need to know how their business is doing. Are they actually making money, do the bookkeeping, and they all need to pay taxes.
Yep.
And so that's why we're able to have a pretty broad book of business.
Got it.
And delivery drivers and gig workers are like one of the 5 biggest categories on our platform, but it is pretty
What are
broad, right?
the top 5 categories?
There are folks that the top 5 categories. So professional services is a big one. So that's things like consultants, freelance designers,
Cool.
things like that. Construction and maintenance is another big one for us. Delivery drivers. Let me just pull up. Retail is a top 5, and then beauty, barber, salon is
What would retail be?
another big.
That'd be like
That
someone
might
with like
be,
their own shop or something.
yeah, you've got your own Etsy shop. You maybe have a
Cool.
Shopify store. You might even have a brick and mortar store.
Yeah.
Again, similar to how delivery driving explosion in 1099 workers there, because platforms, things like Etsy and Shopify have made it a
For
lot
sure.
easier to
Yeah,
become
and
a
I think
retailer as well.
I think you're right, right? Obviously, there's a lot of synergies. I always tell people that, driving rideshare or delivering is like great practice for running your own business, right? I mean, Uber and Lyft or the companies, they literally just turn the app on and they send you customers. Getting customers is like the hardest part of the business. And obviously, a lot of people complain that, the commission they take is too high, but, they're kind of solving the hardest part of, starting a business is like, where do I find my customers, right? And if you go out and do your own, right, you now kind of have that practice. You understand, I got to diversify my income. I got to work for both Uber and Lyft. I probably don't want to have, just one big client if I'm running my own consultant, because if they ditch me, then I don't have a job anymore, right? So I do love I love encouraging people, and we see a lot of people actually transition from gig economy into kind of those 4 other categories that you see. To be honest, sometimes when their time is done as a driver.
Yeah, and that's one feature that we actually just recently added, because it is a trend that we're seeing quite a bit in self-employment, is multiple lines of self-employment. And so that could be Uber, Lyft, DoorDash. It could also be Etsy shop, Uber. And so we actually have recently launched tags so that you could tag income and expenses with, this is for my Etsy shop,
Cool.
this is for Uber, and then filter your P&L so you can see how much profit am I actually making from my Uber time, how much profit am I actually making from my time on Etsy as well.
So I think one thing that's unique for rideshare and delivery drivers is the mileage component, right? Because you're putting a lot of miles on your car, and this is important for taxes because it's a big deduction. So how do you guys account for that in the product?
Yeah, there's basically 2 ways you can do it, and we let you choose between them in the product. So one is enter your mileage. And so a lot of folks will use a mileage tracking app, or some of the apps provide it directly to them. And there's just a spot where you enter your mileage over a given time period. Or you can say, I'm not going to do it based on mileage. The expenses I incurred for maintenance, et cetera, is more than that. And so I'm going to go with the directly logging maintenance and gas, et cetera, on my car.
Cool. So I have an interesting question for you about my last question about the product. I'm curious. So maybe no one's ever asked you this before, but why are people not signing up for Found? If you're telling them about the product, like what's the one reason they're like, oh, I'm not ready to sign up yet, or I don't want to sign up because of this reason?
Yeah, I would say the biggest reason is people not knowing about it. So that's one of the reasons I'm here
That's
on
why you're
this
here.
podcast.
All right.
I do think specifically for your audience, something that we'll be adding in the coming months that we don't have yet is cashback. And so especially for folks spending a lot of money on
Yeah.
gas, there can be cards that give cash back on that. So that is something that we will be adding.
So cash back on
And
all your debit card purchases from the Found.
yeah, and it's going to be merchant specific. So we're
Cool.
working with a partner so that you'll get cash back at select merchants, and don't have the list completely finalized yet, but there
Gotcha.
will almost certainly be gas as one of the
Yep.
focus categories there.
I think gas is always a good one, driver's number one expense, and very visible, right? Since you have to pay for it a few times a week. So, wanted to spend the last few minutes of the interview kind of drilling down on drivers and gig workers, since you're kind of an expert here in, I really like the kind of transition of your career and kind of working. You mentioned the pizza shop, you mentioned Caviar, and I feel like you understand the workers and now doing with Found. So I would love to know, what are some of the most common challenges, for gig workers in general when it comes to finances, and dealing with them?
Yeah, so I think the biggest one is just not knowing, like it's complicated,
Hmm.
and not knowing where to go for answers.
Hmm.
Um, do you go on a Reddit forum? Do you
Answers
talk
to
to
which
others?
questions?
To just what can I write off?
Mm,
What is the impact of spending $20 on this category of item versus that
gotcha.
category of item? Do I need to pay quarterly taxes?
Hmm.
Um, how do I pay quarterly taxes? That sort of stuff. And so we've got a pretty good resource center at found.com that walks through a lot of this stuff. And on the calculation side, that's the type of problem that software can solve really well. And so that's where all you have to do is use your Found
Gotcha.
account, and we automatically do the rest of that stuff for you.
Do you ever have an issue with drivers, sort of, like I was saying, it's like, oh, if I don't calculate my quarterly taxes, I don't kind of have to pay them. I like have to pay them, but if I don't do it, it's almost like, I don't want to go to the doctor, right? Because I don't want to find out that I'm sick. Like, how do you do you
That
see that much with drivers? And if so, how do you overcome that and kind of convince them?
I would guess if you surveyed drivers,
Hmm.
potentially more than half actually behave that way. That's probably the most common
Mm,
way to behave, is to ignore the problem. Similar to your point on the doctor, the problem with that is then what happens if the IRS says, where have your quarterly taxes been, and they assess
yeah,
a fine to you? It's like going to the doctor, not going to the doctor, and then realizing you had some health condition that would have been much easier to take care of had you caught it a year earlier.
yeah,
And so an understandable strategy, but a risky one, right? It's
got it.
fine until it's not, until you get fined by the IRS for not paying quarterly estimates.
Got it. So quarterly taxes, I think, are a good one that, some drivers may not be aware of, or, if they are, they're not, not understanding the resources or how it works or how much they need to pay. If you sort of were able to, only give one tip to rideshare and delivery drivers, it was like, hey, here's the one action. I know you've got 5 or 10 things you need to do when it comes to your finances, but realistically, I want you to do one thing in the next week. What would be the one thing you would tell them?
I think the one thing is have a separate bank account.
Mm,
Don't, it is just so much harder to do all this if you're commingling your business income with your personal expenses. And
got
so I
it.
think that would be the number one. I'd obviously personally love if that's a Found account.
Yeah. Well,
But
why
even
is
if it's
that?
not
Why
a
is it
Found
so
account,
important to sort of not commingle the expenses? Just because it's hard organizationally, or
yeah, you won't know how much profit you're actually
Mhm.
making, right? You can trick yourself into thinking that the number you're seeing on your payout report is how much you're making, and not taking into account all the expenses
Yeah,
associated with it, and not taking into account any taxes you have to pay into how much you're actually making from these platforms. And you can easily miss a business expense and a write-off, and then that's just money that you're paying to the government that you otherwise wouldn't have, because your business expenses are all
yeah,
in the same account as your personal. You might see something a year later or
yeah,
3 months later and think it was a personal expense when actually it was a business expense.
yeah.
If you have two separate accounts, if you have two separate cards, and every time it's a business account, you're using the business card, you're not going to miss anything. And
Yeah.
so I think that's the biggest shame when someone misses out on and pays more taxes than they actually owe because they forgot that that phone mount was actually a business
Yeah.
expense because
I
they
like
put it on
that.
their personal credit card.
Yeah, I like that suggestion a lot because it's also realistic, right? It's like, okay, I know you got quarterly taxes, you got mileage. It's sort of like, hey, first step, start separating, getting in the habit of splitting. If it's a personal expense, I put it here. If it's a business expense, I put it there. Obviously, all your income can kind of come through, but then you start tracking your expenses. And, I think like being a good business owner, you have to like flex the muscles, right? Like it doesn't happen overnight. You have to practice. And so I think it's like doable, but also realistic. And I was sort of perusing. You guys have a lot of good guides and resources for drivers, so we'll definitely link to that in the show notes. So if people want to go take a look at that, they can. Is there anything else you want to mention about Found or your sort of work advice for delivery and rideshare drivers out there?
I would just love to ask any self-employed folks or rideshare drivers, delivery drivers that listen to your podcast to go to found.com, check us out. We do have a deal for your listeners. So if you use
Cool.
code rideshare when you're signing up, you'll get $25 bonus when you spend 100 on your Found debit card. So we
All
just
right.
say,
Well,
check
you're
us
already on
out.
the right track if you're giving out free money.
Yeah, that helps everybody. Who doesn't enjoy some free money?
Yeah, definitely. Very cool. Well, before I let you go, I want to give you the opportunity to ask me one question in our famous segment, Ask Harry a Question, which some people like, some people don't. But anything you want to know about gig economy or anything at large?
I would say your own personal business. What is your least favorite part? The part you mentioned, bookkeeping and taxes, something that you know you have to do, but you don't necessarily want to do. What is
Yeah.
your least favorite part of running your business? The part that feels like, eating your vegetables, like you have to do it, but you don't
Yeah.
you don't look forward to it.
I think, for me, I've been running the rideshare guy, media business now for 9 years. And so we've got a blog and podcast and YouTube channel, and we've got a lot of people behind the scenes, that are basically full time who are paying salaries and, running payroll and stuff like that. But I think the one thing that kind of I don't look forward to that much, maybe because I think I was like very diligent about it for the first 6 or 7 years, is kind of like what I would call like quarterly financial analysis. And like, I don't know exactly what you're supposed to do, what public companies do. I just know what I do is like every quarter for about 7 years, I looked really carefully at how much money we were making, income, expenses compared to last month, last quarter, or last year, and sort of just look for different opportunities, how many advertisers we had, or, like, oh, wow, this is kind of dropping off, or we should look to invest more in this category, or, oh, wow, these people, some of my writers are really expensive and not doing that great, whatever it might be. And I feel like I've gotten a little burnt out on that the past couple years. And I definitely like, there were a few years there where I was kind of burnt out and I just pushed through it. But I know the last year or two, I've sort of, kind of half-assed it a bit, or, passed some of the work off to my team or my bookkeeper. But, I mean, running a business is hard in the first place. And then doing it consistently for many, many years at a time, I think, is even harder. So I think that's kind of like the one thing that is difficult for me. And it's tough to find someone that can kind of do that analysis, but also kind of like cares as much as you do. Because I always tell people like no one cares about your business as much as you do. So it's like really hard, if not impossible, to hire someone who, for that type of role if you want them to care as much as you do.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. I think the answer there is to treat yourself with a vacation afterwards.
Well, I'm definitely good at taking vacations if anyone has ever emailed me. So, well, Nick, I really appreciate you coming on. This was super cool to learn about Found. I'm always a fan of product services that are helping drivers make more, save more, and, kind of make their lives easier. So, listeners, viewers can go to found.com/rideshare and they get $25 when they open a new Found account if they spend at least $100 within the first 30 days. So, appreciate that offer. And we'll definitely get the word out and hopefully send a bunch more gig workers your way.
Great. Thanks for having me on. Really appreciate it, Harry.
All right.